On a distant world, where towering mountains pierced the sky and vast forests stretched for miles, lived a warrior unlike any other. He was a proud father, known throughout his people for his strength and valor. His name was Kale, and his daughter, Alara, was once his greatest hope for the future. She was fierce and swift, a warrior in the making. But that was before the accident. Alara had been in the midst of a battle, fighting against a rival clan, when disaster struck. A powerful blow to her back left her paralyzed from the waist down. The same strength that had once been her pride was now her curse. Her dreams of becoming a warrior vanished in an instant, replaced by the painful reality of her condition. Kel could do little to comfort her, knowing that in their society, strength was everything. Without it, Alara would never be seen as more than a burden. The alien world where Kale and Alara lived was harsh. Their people valued warriors above all else. The strong were admired and celebrated, while the weak were cast aside. Alara's paralysis marked her as someone who could never rise to the level of greatness her father had once imagined for her. He was crushed by the weight of his failure as a father. Yet, deep down, he knew that Alara still had a fire within her, something the world had yet to see. One evening, after hours of silent contemplation, Kale made a decision that would change everything. He would seek help from the humans. The humans were different, strange, yet capable of things that the alien people could not fully understand. Kale had heard of their warriors, known for their compassion, their resourcefulness, and their courage. The humans had something that the alien people lacked: heart. Kale found the human he had heard of, a soldier who had fought in many battles on Earth. His name was Thomas, and he was a man of honor, someone who had earned the respect of both humans and aliens alike. Kale reached out to Thomas, explaining his daughter's plight. He told Thomas of Alara's fall and of how the entire clan now saw her as weak. He asked for one thing: take her, teach her, help her find a new purpose. At first, Thomas was hesitant. He had no experience with the alien people and knew little of their ways. He wasn't sure if he was the right man for the job. But when Kale spoke of his daughter's courage and inner strength, something stirred in Thomas. He had seen many warriors in his life, but none had been tested like this young woman. Maybe there was something special in her, something worth fighting for. After a long silence, Thomas agreed. He would travel to the alien world and meet Alara. He would train her, not in the way of traditional warriors, but in a way that would allow her to rise above her disability. He promised to give her a chance, not as a warrior in the usual sense, but as something more. When Kel brought Alara to meet Thomas, she was quiet, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. She had already accepted her new life, one where she would never walk again, never hold a weapon again. But as she looked at the human soldier, something inside her stirred. She wasn't sure what it was, but there was something in his eyes that told her this man might be the key to her future. Thomas looked at the young woman before him, noting her beauty, but more importantly, the sadness in her eyes. He knew this would not be an easy task. But as he looked at her, he also saw potential. There was a strength in her that had not yet been unlocked, and perhaps it was his role to do just that. "Don't worry," Thomas said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'll help you find your way. We'll figure this out together." Alara nodded, unsure of what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. This part sets the stage for the rest of the story, introducing the characters, their struggles, and the decision that will change everything. Thomas had agreed to help, but as he stood on the alien world, looking out over the strange, rugged landscape, he couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. He had faced wars, battles, and the fiercest enemies on Earth, but training a paralyzed alien girl, he had no experience with that. Alara's father, Kale, had left them together, trusting Thomas to guide his daughter. As the days passed, Thomas knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Alara's eyes showed the quiet sadness of someone who had once been full of hope, only to have it shattered. It was clear she had lost much of her belief in herself. When Alara arrived at Thomas' training grounds, she was still hesitant. She moved in a chair with wheels, her body unable to support her own weight, yet there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. The scars from the battle that had paralyzed her still mirrored her skin, but they didn't define her. At least, Thomas hoped they wouldn't. Thomas didn't waste time with formalities. "All right, Alara, I know you're used to being a warrior, but things are different now. You may not be able to fight the same way, but that doesn't mean you can't be strong," he said. His voice was calm, yet firm. Alara looked at him, her expression cold. She wasn't sure if she believed him. She had been told her entire life that warriors fought with strength, and she had lost that. What could she do now? How could she be strong when she couldn't even walk? "I can't fight like I used to," she said quietly. "I can't even stand on my own." Thomas nodded. "You're right. You won't fight the way you did before, but I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to fight in a new way, one where your mind and spirit will guide you. We'll start slow. Let's see what you can do with what you have." Alara wasn't sure what he meant, but she was willing to try. After all, what did she have to lose? She had been given a second chance, and this time, she would do whatever it took to prove that she wasn't a lost cause. For the first few days, Thomas didn't push her too hard. He started by teaching her about strategy and tactics, things that didn't require physical strength, but instead demanded sharp thinking and quick decision-making. They practiced mental exercises, focusing on building her confidence. At first, Alara struggled. She was frustrated with herself, and Thomas could see it in her eyes. She wanted to fight, to show her worth in a way that everyone would understand. But she couldn't, and that truth weighed heavily on her. Thomas noticed her frustration and paused their training one afternoon. "You're trying to do too much too soon. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to me. Just take it one step at a time. Focus on what you can control." Alara looked up at him, surprised. His words weren't like the harsh commands she had been given by her father or others in her life. They weren't filled with pity either. They were simple, honest, and somehow they made sense. Maybe this wasn't just about fighting battles. Maybe this was about something deeper, something within her. Over the next few weeks, Thomas began to challenge her more. He didn't expect her to fight with a sword or lift weights. Instead, he focused on her mind and spirit. He taught her how to use her disability to her advantage. Alara was sharp, quick to learn the strategies that Thomas taught her. She learned how to read the battlefield, how to anticipate her enemies' moves before they made them, and how to use her environment to her benefit. But there was one thing Alara struggled with, accepting her new reality. She couldn't escape the feeling that she had lost something vital, something that made her who she was. The warrior inside her felt like a ghost, haunting her thoughts. One evening, after another long day of training, Thomas sat beside her as the two of them watched the sunset. "You've come a long way, Alara. I see strength in you. You've been through more than most people could even imagine, and you're still here. That counts for something." Alara stared out at the horizon, the orange and purple hues filling the sky. She was still unsure, still uncertain of what her future would hold. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a small flicker of hope. "I'm not sure I can be the warrior I once was," Alara said quietly, "but maybe I can be something else. Maybe I can be something better." Thomas smiled, his voice warm. "You can be anything you want to be, Alara. I believe that." And with that, Alara made a choice. She would no longer define herself by what she had lost. She would focus on what she could still become. This part continues to develop the bond between Thomas and Alara, showing her growth and the challenges she faces, as well as the beginning of her transformation into something new. As the days turned into weeks, Alara began to grow accustomed to the routines Thomas had set for her. At first, everything felt strange. Training without the use of her legs was nothing like the combat she had once known. But slowly, she began to understand that this wasn't about doing what she used to do. It was about adapting, learning to fight with the tools she had left. Thomas's training methods were unlike anything she had experienced before. He didn't ask her to fight with swords or shields. Instead, he asked her to think. He taught her to see the battlefield not as a place of physical strength, but as a place of strategy and quick decision-making. Thomas believed that a warrior's greatest weapon wasn't just their body, it was their mind. And Alara had one of the sharpest minds he had ever encountered. Each day, Thomas would give her a new challenge. Sometimes it was a mental puzzle, where she had to figure out how to outsmart an opponent. Other times, he would set up mock battles, where she had to lead a team of soldiers, using only her tactical knowledge to outmaneuver them. At first, Alara was hesitant, unsure of herself. She struggled to trust her instincts, worried that she might fail or make a mistake. But Thomas never let her give up. He kept pushing her, telling her that mistakes were part of learning and growing. One day, after an intense practice session, Thomas sat down beside her. She had just finished analyzing the simulated battle, identifying weaknesses in the enemy's formation. It was one of her best performances yet, but she didn't feel the pride she thought she would. Instead, she felt a deep emptiness, a longing for the physical strength she once had. She missed the feeling of a weapon in her hand, the rush of battle coursing through her veins. "Do you think I can ever be a warrior again?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Thomas looked at her, his expression calm but serious. "You've already proven that you are a warrior, Alara. You've just had to redefine what being a warrior means. A true warrior is someone who faces challenges head-on, no matter the odds. You're doing that every day." Alara's eyes filled with a mix of frustration and hope. She knew Thomas was right, but it was hard to let go of the vision she had always had for herself. She wanted to be strong in the same way she had been before, to fight in the front lines, to wield a weapon and charge into battle with her head held high. But now her fight was different. It was an internal battle, one of acceptance and adaptation. The next challenge Thomas set for her was unlike any other. He asked her to lead a group of trainees in a simulated battle, guiding them as if she were their general. Alara's heart raced at the thought. Leading was something she had never done before. She had always followed the orders of others, never been the one to give them. But she had learned from Thomas. She had learned how to think ahead, how to make decisions under pressure, how to lead with confidence. The battle simulation began, and Alara was in charge. She watched as her team moved into position, waiting for her instructions. Every decision mattered. If she made the wrong move, they could lose. But if she made the right move, they could win. It was a heavy responsibility, one that weighed on her shoulders, but she knew she was ready. Her first decision was to send a small group to flank the enemy's right side, while the rest of the team would attack head-on. It was a risky move, but it was her only chance to take the enemy by surprise. As the battle unfolded, she could see her plan coming to life. The enemy's forces were caught off guard, and her team gained the upper hand. When the simulation ended, Thomas nodded in approval. "You did it, Alara. You led your team to victory," he said, his voice full of pride. For the first time in a long while, Alara felt a surge of pride. She had done it. She had led her team to victory, not by strength or force, but by using her mind and her skills. She hadn't just been a warrior, she had become a leader. The next few days brought more challenges, each one more difficult than the last. Alara learned to navigate her disability in ways she never thought possible. She trained her mind to think faster, to anticipate her enemy's every move. She began to trust herself, her instincts, and her ability to lead. And with each challenge, she grew stronger, not physically, but in a way that mattered even more. Alara's journey was far from over. But as she looked back on how far she had come, she realized that she was no longer the girl who had been left broken and paralyzed. She was a warrior, in her own right. A warrior who had learned that true strength came from within. Alara woke up early the next morning, as she had every day since Thomas began her training. The sun was barely rising, painting the sky with soft colors of pink and orange. She sat on the edge of her bed, looking out at the horizon. Her heart was heavy with anticipation. She had been training for weeks now, pushing herself further than she ever thought possible. But today felt different. Today, there would be a test, a real challenge, and Alara wasn't sure she was ready for it. Thomas had told her that a group of raiders was approaching, a band of mercenaries who had been causing trouble in the nearby regions. They weren't just a threat to the humans. They were a threat to everyone in the area. The planet's leaders had called for help, and Alara was expected to take part in the defense. Thomas had been training her for this moment, but despite her progress, a part of her was still unsure. "I've trained you well," Thomas had said yesterday, his voice calm but firm. "But today, you will face a real test. You won't be fighting like the warriors of old, but you will fight with the skills you have now. You will lead." Alara didn't feel ready. She hadn't yet proven herself in a real battle, and the thought of going up against real enemies made her nervous. She had always been taught that a warrior's strength came from their body, their ability to fight on the front lines. But now, her strength came from her mind, from strategy and leadership. It was a different kind of strength, but it still felt uncertain. As the hours passed, Alara gathered with the small group of defenders that Thomas had helped prepare. They weren't soldiers, but farmers, workers, and other civilians who had been trained in basic combat. Alara was their leader for the day, and she could see the doubt in their eyes as they looked to her for guidance. They didn't know her like Thomas did. They didn't know what she was capable of. The raiders appeared on the horizon, their ships dark against the lightening sky. The air was thick with tension as they came closer. Alara felt her heart race in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was what she had been trained for. She had to lead them. "Stay calm," Alara said, her voice steady, though she could feel her nerves. "We have a plan. Stick to it, and we'll be fine. We can outsmart them. We can win." Her words were simple, but they had the desired effect. The group seemed to calm, their focus shifting from fear to determination. Alara's leadership was beginning to take root. She had never expected to be in charge of anyone, let alone a group of civilians, but in this moment she was. She trusted her training, and she trusted herself. Thomas stood off to the side, watching as Alara took command. He could see the change in her. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived here weeks ago, full of doubt and fear. She had grown into a leader. She had found her strength. The battle began with the raiders charging forward, confident that they would crush the defenders with ease. But Alara had a different plan. She had positioned her team in hidden spots, ready to strike when the raiders least expected it. As the enemy approached, Alara gave the signal, and the ambush began. Alara's heart pounded in her chest as her team struck. The raiders were caught off guard, and chaos erupted. Alara moved swiftly, directing her team and anticipating the enemy's next move. She knew the raiders would regroup, but she had already planned for that. She had studied their movements, learned their tactics, and now it was paying off. She wasn't just reacting. She was controlling the flow of the battle. The enemy, realizing they were at a disadvantage, tried to retreat. But it was too late. Alara had already positioned her team to cut off their escape routes. In a matter of minutes, the raiders were defeated, their forces scattered. Alara stood among the smoke and dust, her breath heavy but steady. The battle was won, and she had led them to victory. It wasn't the same kind of victory she had imagined in the past, when she dreamed of being a warrior on the front lines. But it was a victory nonetheless. It was her victory, and it was a victory built on strategy, quick thinking, and leadership. As the team celebrated, Thomas walked over to her, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Alara. You led them." Alara looked at him, her heart full. She hadn't just won a battle. She had proven to herself that she was capable of leading, that she could still be a warrior in her own way. She had found her strength, not in the way she had once imagined, but in the way she had learned to fight. "I couldn't have done it without you," Alara said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You did it yourself," Thomas replied. "You're a warrior now, Alara. You've always been one." And in that moment, Alara knew he was right. She had become something more than just a warrior. She had become a leader. The victory over the raiders had been a turning point for Alara. It wasn't just the win that had changed her, but the realization that she could lead, and lead well. For the first time in a long while, she felt the spark of hope inside her, a feeling that had long been buried under doubt and fear. But even as her confidence grew, the peaceful days following the battle were fleeting. A new threat was looming on the horizon, one that would test her in ways she never imagined. Alara had been spending the morning reviewing battle strategies with her team when Thomas approached her with serious news. The distant rumble of a new fleet arriving on the planet was heard. And this time, the threat was much greater. These weren't just raiders or mercenaries. They were the forces of a powerful alien empire, known for their ruthlessness and desire to conquer. The empire had heard of the humans' growing influence on the planet and viewed it as a challenge to their authority. They were coming to wipe out anyone who stood in their way. "We don't have much time," Thomas said, his face grim. "This enemy won't be like the last. They'll come with everything they've got." Alara felt the weight of the words settle over her like a heavy cloud. She had won a small victory, but this was different. The stakes were higher now. The fear she had managed to keep at bay began to creep into her thoughts. Could she really lead her people against an army this powerful? She had no battle experience in large-scale wars. What if they weren't prepared? But she quickly pushed the thoughts aside. Doubt had no place now. Her team, the people who looked up to her, needed her. She had no choice but to lead them, no matter how scared she felt inside. "We'll need a plan," Alara said, her voice steady, but with an edge of determination. "I'll need you to help me. We can't do this alone." Thomas nodded, knowing that Alara had already accepted the responsibility. He had seen her grow over the past few weeks, and he had no doubt that she was ready. Still, the task ahead was daunting, and the odds were not in their favor. For the next few days, they worked tirelessly to prepare. Alara met with her team, explaining the gravity of the situation. This time, there would be no surprise attacks. They would face the full force of an army, and their only hope was to use their knowledge of the terrain, their wits, and the strategies Thomas had taught her. The enemy fleet arrived sooner than expected, descending upon the planet like a dark cloud. The soldiers of the alien empire were unlike anything Alara had faced before, well-trained, heavily armed, and ready for war. Alara watched them land from a distance, her heart pounding. They were massive ships, the size of small cities, and they cast a long shadow over the land. This was real. There was no turning back now. Alara gathered her team for one last briefing. As they stood before her, she could see the fear in their eyes. These were not soldiers, but ordinary people who had never been in a war. They had only learned the basics of combat, and now they were expected to face an enemy army. "We're not just defending our homes," Alara said, her voice strong and clear. "We're defending our way of life. And we have something they don't. We have our will, our strategy, and we have each other. Don't let fear take control. We will fight, not with strength alone, but with everything we've learned." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had fought for. She wasn't just talking to her team. She was talking to herself as well. This battle was not just about winning. It was about proving that she, and everyone with her, had the strength to face the impossible. As the alien forces began their advance, Alara took her place at the front. Her heart raced, but her mind was clear. The strategy she had learned from Thomas flooded her thoughts. She knew how to use the land to her advantage. She knew how to read the enemy's movements. She wasn't a soldier, and she wasn't fighting with physical strength, but she had something even more powerful: her mind and her unbreakable will. The battle began, and Alara's team moved swiftly, using the cover of the land to launch surprise attacks. The enemy was caught off guard, and Alara's heart surged with hope. But she knew this was only the beginning. The real test was yet to come. The alien forces had more soldiers, more firepower. But Alara wasn't backing down. She had fought too hard to let fear rule her now. "Stay focused," she shouted to her team, as explosions echoed in the distance. "We can do this." She led them into battle, and as the first wave of enemy soldiers began to fall, Alara knew one thing for sure. She would not let this be the end. Not for her, not for her people. She had come too far to fail now. The battle had raged for hours, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the air. Alara's team had held their ground, using everything they had learned from Thomas. The strategy she had developed with his guidance was working. The enemy was disoriented, caught off guard by the cunning attacks and quick maneuvers of the defenders. But Alara knew this was only the beginning. The alien empire's forces were vast, and their real strength had yet to show itself. As the dust settled and the battlefield grew quiet for a moment, Alara looked over her team. They were tired, but they were still standing. She felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders more than ever. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything they had worked for. The stakes were higher now. Her people's future was at risk. "Stay sharp," she called out to her team. "They're regrouping. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Just as she said those words, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. At first it was just a dark silhouette, but as it came closer, Alara's heart skipped a beat. It was Kel, her father. His massive frame and proud stance were unmistakable. His armor was scratched and dented from battles of his own, but he still walked with the same commanding presence he always had. Alara froze for a moment. Her father had been gone for so long, ever since she had been injured. She hadn't expected him to return. And now, after everything she had been through, she wasn't sure what his arrival meant. Would he be proud of her? Would he see her as the warrior she had become? Or would he still see her as the girl who had failed him? As Kel drew nearer, he finally spoke, his voice booming over the noise of the battlefield. "Alara," he said, his tone a mix of pride and concern. "I see you have led them well." Alara stood tall, meeting his gaze. "I've done what I had to do. We're not finished yet." Kel nodded, acknowledging her words. "I can see that, but you're not alone anymore." He turned his gaze toward the battlefield, where the alien forces were preparing for another assault. "I've come to help." Alara felt a rush of emotions. Her father's return was both a relief and a challenge. She had always looked up to him, and now, with her own leadership tested in the heat of battle, it was hard to reconcile the girl who had once relied on him with the woman who had led a team to victory. "We're holding our ground," she said firmly. "We've made progress, but we're not finished. The enemy is regrouping. We'll need everything we have to stop them." Kel gave a proud smile, but his eyes were focused. "You've done more than I could have hoped. But now, it's time to show them what we're really capable of." Alara's heart swelled with pride. It was strange to hear her father speak like this, to hear him praise her as an equal. She had always seen him as the ultimate warrior, the one who never faltered, who never showed weakness. But now, he was acknowledging her strength, her ability to lead, and it felt like a validation of everything she had worked for. Together, Alara and Kel walked to the front of the battlefield, their team of defenders standing ready behind them. The alien forces were regrouping for one final push, but Alara felt a sense of confidence she hadn't had before. With her father by her side, she knew they had a chance. Her mind raced with plans, strategies she had learned from Thomas and from her own experiences. This battle would be their defining moment, and she was ready to face it. "Everyone, listen up," Alara called out, her voice strong and commanding. "This is our moment. We fight for our homes, for our families. We have the advantage, but we need to be smart. Follow my lead, and we will win this. Cale stood by her side, proud of the leader she had become. His daughter had proven herself, and now it was time for them to fight together. As the alien forces advanced once again, Alara and Cale exchanged a glance, one of mutual understanding. They had both changed. Alara had grown into a warrior in her own right, and now they would face the enemy together. The final battle was about to begin. This part introduces a significant moment of change and reconciliation for Alara and her father, Cale. It highlights her growth as a leader, showing that she's not only capable of leading on her own, but she can also earn her father's respect. It sets the stage for the next chapter in their fight for survival and victory. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke filled the air, the scent of burning debris mixing with the sounds of battle. Screams, gunfire, and the heavy thud of explosions. Alara stood at the front, her eyes scanning the scene, her mind racing as she gave orders to her team. Beside her, her father, Cale, moved with the precision of a warrior who had fought countless battles. They were a powerful pair now, father and daughter, fighting side by side, but Alara knew this wasn't just about them. This battle wasn't just theirs to win, it was everyone's. The alien forces had regrouped after their earlier defeat. They had learned from their mistakes and were now more determined than ever to crush the defenders. Alara's team, though smaller and less experienced, was holding strong. But they were beginning to feel the weight of the battle. The enemy outnumbered them, and their weapons were more advanced. Alara knew they needed a breakthrough, a way to turn the tide for good. Cale, Alara said, keeping her voice steady despite the tension. We need to take out their command center. If we can disrupt their leadership, their forces will fall apart. Cale nodded, his eyes narrowed as he surveyed the enemy lines. You're right, but it won't be easy. Their command center is well guarded. I know, Alara said, but if we don't try, we'll lose everything. Cale looked at his daughter, his pride evident in the way his gaze softened. Then let's do it. We'll go in together. Alara turned back to her team, her heart racing as she gathered them for the final push. She could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the fear, but she also saw determination. They had come so far already. This was the moment that would define them all. Listen up, Alara called, her voice cutting through the noise of the battlefield. We have one chance to finish this. We'll move fast and hit their command center. If we succeed, their forces will lose their leader and scatter. We can win this, but we have to do it together. Stay focused, follow my lead, and we'll make it. Her words carried weight. The team nodded, some of them nervous, others quietly resolute. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the future. For the first time, Alara felt a true sense of leadership. She wasn't just following orders, she was giving them. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a leader. The plan was set in motion. Alara and Cale led the charge, flanking the enemy's position and moving through the smoke and debris, staying low to avoid detection. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the noise of distant explosions. Alara's heart raced as she glanced at her father. He was still the warrior she had admired all her life, but now he was seeing her in a new light. They reached the command center, a large, heavily fortified structure at the heart of the enemy's lines. The area was crawling with enemy soldiers, and there was no way they could take it head-on. Alara crouched beside Cale, her mind racing through the options. There's a supply tunnel beneath the command center, Cale said quietly. If we can get inside, we can disable their communication systems. Without that, they'll be blind. Alara nodded. Let's do it. The two of them moved quickly, slipping into the tunnel unseen. They crawled through the dark, damp passage, their breaths heavy with tension. Alara's mind kept racing. Every step, every decision could mean the difference between success and failure. But she had come so far, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her now. They reached the control room deep within the command center. Alara quickly got to work, using the knowledge she had gained from her training with Thomas to disable the system. The countdown was on. The enemy wouldn't be distracted for long, and if they weren't fast, they would be caught. Alara's hands worked quickly, her mind sharp and focused. Every move was calculated, every second counting. Finally, with a beep, the system went offline. The command center's communications were down. The enemy forces began to lose coordination. Alara exchanged a look with Cal. There was no time to waste. "We've done it," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. "Now, we get out of here." But as they turned to leave, they were met by a group of enemy soldiers. The firefight was quick and intense, but Alara's team was right behind them. Her team rushed in, taking down the remaining soldiers with precision and speed. The tide had turned. The enemy forces, now disoriented and without leadership, began to scatter. Alara's team pushed forward, taking control of the battlefield. The victory was in sight. As the last of the enemy forces retreated, Alara stood with Kale, breathing heavily, but a smile slowly spreading across her face. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. "You did it, Alara," Kale said, his voice filled with pride. "You led us to victory." The sounds of victory echoed across the battlefield, but Alara knew it wasn't over yet. The enemy forces were retreating, but there was still a final battle to be fought. The alien empire's main force had not yet been fully defeated. They had one more chance to wipe out the resistance and reclaim control of the planet. Alara's heart pounded in her chest as she stood with her father, Kale, and looked at the remnants of the enemy army. "This is it," Kale said, his voice low and serious. "They're not backing down. We need to finish this." Alara nodded. She had led her team through the toughest battle of her life, but the final test was still ahead. They couldn't let up now. The enemy had regrouped, and their forces were stronger than ever. It was time to make a last stand and show them that no matter how powerful they were, they couldn't break the spirit of her people. "Get the team ready," Alara said, turning to her group of defenders. "This is our final push. We've won the battles before, and we'll win this one too. But we need to stay united and stay focused. If we fight together, we will win." The defenders nodded, their faces set with determination. They had fought long and hard, and they knew this was the moment that would determine their future. Alara could see it in their eyes. They were ready. The final battle began with a thunderous roar as the enemy forces charged. They came in waves, their weapons firing, their ships towering overhead. But Alara had already planned for this. She had studied the enemy's tactics, and she knew where they would strike first. She directed her team to hold the high ground, using the terrain to their advantage. Kale stood beside her, his massive frame moving with precision as he led his own team into battle. They fought with a fierce intensity, but Alara kept her focus on the bigger picture. She wasn't just thinking about the present moment. She was thinking ahead, anticipating the enemy's next move. The enemy soldiers were relentless, but Alara didn't flinch. She barked orders to her team, directing them to move in strategic patterns, forcing the enemy to fall into her trap. She had learned the value of thinking quickly, and now it was paying off. As the enemy made their advance, they found themselves getting pushed back, their lines crumbling under the pressure. Alara's mind raced as she surveyed the battlefield. She could see the chaos unfolding, but she also saw opportunity. The enemy's forces were divided, and now was the time to strike. She signaled for her team to move forward, and with a rallying cry, they surged ahead, hitting the enemy where they were weakest. The battle was intense, but Alara felt a sense of calm amidst the chaos. This was her moment. This was the test she had been preparing for. She wasn't just a leader. She was a warrior, a strategist, and a symbol of hope for her people. Every decision she made was carefully calculated, and every command she gave was followed with trust. Her team was holding their ground, but the enemy wasn't backing down. They had brought reinforcements, and the battle was tipping in their favor. Alara could feel the pressure mounting. They needed more time to secure a victory, but the enemy's forces were overwhelming. "That's enough," Alara shouted. She turned to her father, her eyes filled with determination. "We're going to finish this now." Cale nodded, understanding her unspoken words. Together, they led a final charge. Alara fought with everything she had, her blade cutting through enemy forces with precision. The battle was chaos, but in that moment, Alara felt a sense of purpose like never before. Her mind was sharp, her body moving with the skill and agility she had trained for. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting for something greater than herself. The final push was decisive. The enemy forces began to retreat, their morale broken. The defenders had fought with everything they had, and now the alien empire's control over the planet was slipping away. Alara stood at the front, her breath heavy but steady, as the last of the enemy forces were driven off. The battlefield fell silent. The dust began to settle, and Alara looked around at her team. They had won. Against all odds, they had defeated an enemy that had seemed unbeatable. Her people were safe, their future secure. "We did it," Alara said, her voice hoarse with emotion. "We fought for each other, and we won." Cale stepped beside her, his expression proud. "You did it, Alara. You led us to victory." Alara looked at her father, the weight of the past months lifting from her shoulders. She had proven herself, not just as his daughter, but as a leader in her own right. She had taken on the impossible and emerged victorious. And in that moment, she knew that she had become the warrior she had always dreamed of being. The sun rose over the battlefield, casting a soft light on the ruins of what had once been a battlefield. The air was still thick with the remnants of smoke, and the sounds of battle had faded into silence. But for Alara, this silence was a sweet one. The war was over. The planet was free. The enemy had been driven back, and her people had survived. Alara stood at the edge of the field, her eyes scanning the horizon. The events of the past few days felt like a dream, intense, terrifying, and yet, in the end, victorious. She had fought with everything she had, and now, with the war finally over, she could breathe. But as she looked out at the world she had fought for, she knew her journey wasn't over. She had led her people through the hardest battle of their lives, but now it was time to rebuild. Her father, Cale, stood beside her. His presence was a comforting one, but even he seemed tired, his armor battered and worn from the battle. The fight had been long, but Alara knew he was proud of her. They had both changed in ways they hadn't expected. Cale had come to see Alara, not just as his daughter, but as a leader, someone who had the strength to rise above any challenge. "We did it," Cale said, his voice gruff, but filled with pride. Alara nodded, her mind racing. "Yes, but now we rebuild. We can't stay here, in the shadow of the past. We have to move forward." Cale turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You've grown more than I could have imagined. I've watched you fight, lead, and become the warrior I always hoped you would be. I'm proud of you, Alara. You've proven yourself." Alara smiled, but there was no arrogance in her smile. There was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done something bigger than herself. She had become the leader her people needed, and the warrior she had always dreamed of becoming. But there was still so much more to do. "We have a long road ahead of us," Alara said. "This is just the beginning. We can't rest yet." She turned back to the survivors of the battle, her people. They were tending to the wounded, rebuilding what had been destroyed, and looking toward the future with hope in their eyes. Alara had seen them fight beside her, had seen the fear and doubt in their eyes. But now, they were looking at her with something new: respect, admiration, and trust. They saw her not just as the daughter of a great warrior, but as their leader. Thomas, the human soldier who had been by her side from the very beginning, walked up to her. His face was tired, but his eyes shone with pride. He had watched her grow from the girl who had struggled to accept her new reality into a true warrior. "You've come a long way, Alara," Thomas said. "You've proven that strength isn't just about what's on the outside. It's about what's in here." He tapped his chest, then looked at her with a smile. "You're ready for whatever comes next." Alara smiled, feeling the weight of his words. He had been more than just a mentor. He had been a friend, someone who had always believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. She owed much of her success to his guidance and unwavering support. "Thank you, Thomas," she said quietly. "I couldn't have done it without you." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Alara turned back to her people. There was much work to be done. The planet needed to be rebuilt, and the people needed a leader to guide them. But Alara knew she was ready. She had faced the impossible and come out victorious. She had found her strength, and now she would use it to lead her people into a future of peace and prosperity. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges and hardships. But Alara was no longer the girl who had lost everything in the blink of an eye. She was a warrior, a leader, and a symbol of hope. She had fought for her people and had led them to victory. And now she would fight for their future. Her journey had just begun. But Alara was ready. The legacy of strength, courage, and leadership she had built would be the foundation of the new world they would build together.